Welcome back to our weekly yoga philosophy and Bhagavad Gita studies. We are diving into the end of chapter 2 here, talking about the spiritual path and what that looks like. Last week's class was really great. Jagai created this awesome flow chart that was spectacular. I feel like it should be printed and framed and handed out to all spiritual seekers as a map. So good to be back here with you all, and we will dive into our class today and open with our invocations as we always do. So Jagai, if you want to put that up on the screen so people can follow along. And Dr. Max is going to lead us in the chanting today.
How far are we going to go?
Oh, that's up to you, how you feel. I don't know. I don't know what's the mood here with this. We've been doing just this first one. We can start just hitting on these two if you wish, and slowly creep into the long one, whatever you feel like doing.
Okay. Do we do the Om Namo Bhagavate?
Yeah.
Okay, so just skip to there after this.
Yeah, let's do these two. Then Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. How's that?
That sounds great.
Okay.
Let's do Hare Krishna 3 times before we say.
Okay, you're leading us into the
I guess I am. I guess I am.
Okay.
Okay. Om Aganya Timirandasya Gyanjanan Shalakaya Jakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobistam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swa Padantikam. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
So nice. Thank you. So last week, I spoke at length, and now I think it's time for me to sit down, stop talking, and we do some mileage into this chapter. We've been doing verse after verse, reading just the translations. Sometimes we dig into the purports, but all those out there who are listening in, my wholehearted recommendation to you is, if you want to read the Bhagavad Gita, go through it and only read one time through, at least, just the translations, skipping the purports, skipping the Sanskrit, all the way through the whole entire book. As Azriel is doing, I don't know if you finished it, Azriel. Have you finished the Gita? Just the translations? No? A little bit left, but she's been doing that. Gives you context and gives you some understanding of what's going on. So let us, do you guys, is the pictures of y'all covering this, or is that, no? Okay.
So each person has the ability to shift that box of videos around. So you're good right now, and
I see.
Each of you on your own end can pick it up and drag it if you need to.
And it doesn't block.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's start here. Let's just do a few rounds. Everybody read 2 of the verses, and anything that strikes us, any questions, any ideas, any thoughts, just blurt them out. I'll start. So we're going to go from chapter 2, text 54, and Arjuna just got a lot of information from Krishna, and he asks a few questions. He says, "Oh Krishna, what are the symptoms of one whose consciousness is thus merged in transcendence? How does he speak? What is his language? How does he sit? And how does he walk?" And again, like I've already said, because I know in this world we're very concerned about gender. That's just the way English is translated. But in Sanskrit, the gender of this is not necessarily referring to us man or a male, but to the soul imbibed in the body. And you see in the Sanskrit, there's no specific word that says, how does a he sit? So it's anybody, okay? And here's this word stita. Anybody remember what stita means, or sta, or like here, stia?
Steady.
Steady, that's right.
Steady.
So one who is steady in pragyasya, or knowledge, one who's steady in samadhi, or consciousness, one who's steady in consciousness is repetitive. Okay, let's go to the next one. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, and that's referring to Krishna, the speaker of Bhagavad Gita, O Partha, Arjuna, when a man gives up all varieties of desires for sense gratification, which arise from mental concoction or speculation, and when his mind, thus purified, finds satisfaction in the self alone, then he is said to be in pure transcendental consciousness. Nice. Any thoughts, any questions? No? Ashriel, you want to do the next two? 256, 257.
One who is not disturbed in mind, even amidst the threefold miseries, or elated when there is happiness, and who is free from attachment, fear, and anger, is called a sage of steady mind.
And what are the threefold miseries? This is a more complex question.
Sense pleasure,
Huh?
sense pleasure, material. I'm not sure.
Good guess, though. You get
Guna? The gunas? No, it could be the gunas.
It's not the gunas. This may be a trick question. Threefold miseries. Dukeshu. Adyatmaka, adibodhika, and adidaivika. Miseries that are generated from the self, which is like your own mind. Adyatmaka, adibodhika. Miseries generated from other living entities. Got bit by a dog. And adhidaivika, miseries which are generated from the world. Bad weather, lost all your money, fell down a hill, something like that. Makes sense? Yeah. COVID.
Okay,
Yes.
so then these three miseries are ways in which we cause suffering in our mind, ways in which we suffer because of our interactions with others, and ways that we suffer because of just the state of the world and things that are beyond
Yes.
our immediate relationships. Okay.
The atmaka means from the self, like the atmaka, adibodhika, by Bodha or Buddha or other living entities, and adidaivika, like Daivi or the gods, the devas, which would be nature and anything from the world. Was that two?
That was one, but that verse kind of reminds me of the one that we were talking about when we were comparing equanimity and the definition of yoga.
Mm-hmm. Tell me more about that.
That yoga, or I guess a sage of steady mind, is kind of the goal of yoga in a way, where you're not super elated when there's happiness, and you don't, you're not swayed to either side or direction when things that are out of your control happen.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So I
Very
feel like
nice.
this really supports that that verse.
Mm-hmm. And here, as you're referring to, that's the Stita Deer Muni, or the sage of steady mind. Yes, that verse I think almost said the same thing too. And so,
either you or Dharma was mentioning last week or the week before about a guru of yours that you never saw them angry before.
yeah, that was Radha Swami. Dharma.
Okay, so when I was reading this purport, because this purport like really stuck out to us, because we don't usually read these, but when we read through the Mooney stuff, it reminded us of that guru that you talked about that you never saw angry. Is that why he was like never angry, because he was a Mooney?
Yeah, and being a Muni means he's freed from, he's not elated in happiness, and he's freed from attachment, fear, and anger, and he's not disturbed by the threefold miseries. So yes, that's what makes him a Muni, Munir, or a sage. Yeah. Yep. So freed from attachment means what? Who can answer that one?
Not like stuck on the outcome, the high, the low, the good, the bad, any of it?
Yes. Or so let's say even, I don't know, a Muni, a sage who lives out into the woods and lives in a cave, has a change of clothes, sits in meditation, and then comes back from getting some water, and I don't know, a bear messed up his cave. An unattached Muni would be detached, say, oh, this is the Lord, the universe, giving me a test. I'm happy to accept it. They go on with their life. And you would expect that. So now what about the person who has a house and a car and a business, and they're trying to do their thing in this world like one of us, and their business fails and somebody steals their car or some crazy crap happens to them, and they are also like, well, we depend on the Lord, we'll see why, I don't know, I'm not going to freak out, I'm going to let it go. Is that person also a Muni?
We wouldn't say they're. Oh, go ahead, whoever's going.
No, go. You could go ahead.
Okay. What first came to us was we wouldn't say that they were a Mooney because, like, yes, they're not going to the attachment, they're just remaining neutral. However, that is a one-time thing. So from what we get from the purport, a Mooney is actually, as it says, able to agitate his mind in various ways for mental speculation without coming to a factual conclusion. So it seems more like it's a commitment and this higher consciousness gift of being able to change your mental space, but keep it like that, versus like if you just are not attached for 1 minute, it's like you can't, just because you have wisdom for 1 second doesn't make you a guru. Like you could be very full of wisdom or something in 1 second, but like maybe all the other seconds you don't have any wisdom. It's just like a one-time isolated incident.
Nice, good observation. I didn't think of that, and I accept that. What do you think, Ed?
Along the same lines, I was going to say it makes them have the qualities of a Muni in that particular instance. But, just because they were like, the money, the car, the material things that you named didn't affect them in that sense. But let's say their girlfriend or boyfriend or partner cheated on them and then they spazzed out, like just because sometimes you're not, we can express that non-attachment to one thing, but let's say we don't have it, we can't do, we can't have that same non-attachment in another area. That may be like the difference. A Muni would be non-attached in any scenario that was presented.
Cool. Now, what happens in like in the case of Radha Swami, who, somebody, Dharma was saying that somebody asked him if you ever get angry. I don't know if she did or somebody else did. And he said, well, I pretend to be angry. What about if you saw him and something happened, the whole temple burnt down and he was totally distraught and upset about it? Would he lose his Muni status? Does it mean that if, I don't know, you come across a field of corpses that you're just like, whatever, what does it actually mean to be freed from attachment and not disturbed in mind, even amongst threefold miseries? Does that mean that a bomb blows up all of Los Angeles and there's dead bodies everywhere and the Munis are just like,
well, I don't think that it's, it wouldn't be that, they still can have compassion and empathy for circumstances and situations in life. The attachment is, if they just couldn't go on living anymore because the temple burned down or because these, this bomb had exploded in the city, they were just like freaking out now and just couldn't continue to even shift their consciousness back to Krishna, to continue to do the work and be in Krishna consciousness. I was thinking about this, that the experience or the thing of attachment, right? And it is for like either of the scenarios we named, like the bear in the woods, if there's a camp or some material stuff in the woods, that's where bears, that's their natural habitat. They go around and they just tear stuff up. Well, we call it tearing stuff up. They are just exploring, experiencing, being hands-on with it. And when a person can understand that, if I bring my tent equipment into this natural playground of where bears and animals go hands-on with stuff, if they get hands-on with it, then I understand that I put that there, and that's what potentially could happen if I walk away from it. When I look at the city, cars and trains and things, all these like things that weigh a lot, they have electricity and gas and explosive things in them, like when those elements collide based off of the multi-dimensional decisions that are being made, whether it's intentional or not, it's like, okay, that is bound to happen at some point. Fire, explosion, those things happen. So I don't have to, I can still have empathy for the people who might be injured in them, but I don't have to like, feel like the world is over and now I'm depressed or sad, or like I'm so moved to the point where I can't continue to live or maintain my consciousness.
Mm-hmm. Very good. Good. Any other thoughts? Go ahead, Max.
Well, I see Azrael's got her hand up too. But just to add on the same lines of what Ed was saying, I think it's important to note that just because one is a sage or a Muni, it doesn't mean that they don't have a very sensory human experience, that they don't have emotions. It's more so that they're attached to their emotional experience. So of course, if we see devastation and chaos, we'll feel, one, as an animal will feel some sort of instinctual emotion. We're just, one who's in that state is perhaps not attached to acting on it or that system of distress. So I'm feeling this and I know why I'm feeling this. And then, my investment in the outcomes is different. But
Mm-hmm. Very nice. Asriel, then TS.
Yeah, I wanted to share something similar to what Max shared, of like the difference between having an emotional response or something that you really feel into the heart that's kind of separate from the mind. And I know that obviously they are connected and that they create our experiences, but in a way to, I guess agree with you, Max, that some things you can feel, have a specific emotional response or have this feeling of compassion in a situation and not allow the mind to, sway into happiness or fear, or anger, or, just kind of accept what it is, and how it is, and still feel in your heart.
And also agree with you. And also you can also think about the Muni for themselves may have a different perspective than for others. Means, okay, like, maybe for themselves, they're unattached, but for others, they have a lot of compassion and are attached that people are happy, right? They have empathy and they have attachment that those in front of them, the experience of other people is that they're peaceful and joyful and life is good, full, satisfied. But for themselves, they're detached. Any other thoughts before we move on? Is this, you read one, right?
Well, we're gonna go before you move on.
Okay, go ahead.
We wanted to say this observation that we saw to like give our answer, but it was regarding Dharma. So we wanted your permission, Dharma, if we can describe an observation of you on the bluff one time.
Yes, totally fine.
Okay. So like this was like coming up as you're talking about this Mooney thing, and then you're like, oh, if they experience something, are they not a Mooney, whatever. Like, I don't know, that this example of Dharma was like so strong in our brain. And it got even stronger when Max said about like the human experience. And so, yeah, it's definitely about like being human. Like, even if you are a Mooney or whatever, a sage, a guru, like if you're enlightened, whatnot, you're still a human and there's still a human experience. And so now I'll explain this observation of Dharma, because I really think this pinpoints and kind of circles how the duality of like your humanness. We had just like finished yoga and we were getting ready to do kirtan, like before they stopped doing it on the bluff. And Dharma had left to do something or whatever. And so the group, we had moved several times because it was super loud out there from this music. So we had to move like 3 different times, and Dharma was gone. So she came back, and her tone and her demeanor when she came back to sit down for kirtan was different. Like maybe she had had a phone call or something. Like we could just sense that on her facial expressions and things, that something like was distraught inside of her body. And so she sits down and she's getting ready to do the kirtan with Ed and the other people. And she's really, you can just tell, and we can feel it from our point of view, like that she's really trying to tap into the kirtan and, sing and do her thing. But whatever is going on in her body and her mind was like so disturbed, not because she doesn't have the skills or anything, or she's not like this wise teacher, like this leader in this community, but she was trying to manage her humanness. And the more you sat, we could just see her just really, like, she closed her eyes and the others were singing, but she wasn't. She was just really like, it seemed like she was trying to get in and like balance out the humanness and what she was trying to do for kirtan. But for whatever reason, she got up and she left. She walked off from the group, and then she didn't come back. She didn't say anything to anybody. She just walked off. And like, we had so much compassion for her, because the storyline that was narrating for us was like, she was in her humanness. She tried to manage it, but she couldn't tap into what was happening. So then she left so she could manage her humanness, because she couldn't be 100% present for that kirtan and for the people that were there. That did not lessen anything about her. That didn't lessen all of the knowledge that she has for these yoga classes that she teaches. She teaches bhakti. She does all these lessons that she's inspiring people with. All she was experiencing was that humanness. And I think the Muni is somebody who can do exactly what Dharma was doing, to be in that humanness, to be upset, to be triggered, to be whatever. And you have the awareness of like not letting it run away. You're holding it and trying to figure out, okay, how can I reset? How do I tap into this without letting it run away? And that's like exactly what it seemed like she did. And that's why it seemed like she walked off. And we had such an honor for her when we saw that, because that was the first time that we really made the connection that, wow, teachers are not just teachers and like up on this soapbox of like this pedestal. They're still human. And I think that was the first time we ever saw Dharma's humanness, because we had her up on this stool that was like, no, like she's a god or something. And in that moment, it reminded us, oh, wow, she is human. And I think that's what this exact thing is talking about. It's the difference between you letting it run away with you, your humanness runs away with you, or you managing it. So I think the Muni doesn't let it run away. Stuff happens, you're triggered, you're upset, whatever, but they don't let it run away with them.
Thank you.
Nice.
Those kind words. That's very astute of you. I remember that day very clearly, and was struggling with my own threefold miseries. And I'm a work in progress. And I think a Muni would have been able to actually, in the midst of that, still been able to tap into the kirtan. But you're right in the sense that, and I wanted to contribute to the conversation as well. So this is a good segue of, it's your nervous system and your sensory system is going to still engage and be entangled with the world. And so you're going to feel things, you're going to have emotions, you're going to have thoughts about those emotions. And a Muni isn't somebody who has learned to get rid of those or doesn't feel and is avoiding those. They just aren't disturbed or deterred by those things. They are no longer hindrances to the path. They are just things that are observed. You like, okay, that's there, but we're not sucked into it. We're not identified with it, but we can actually connect with reality and say that's happening. And also, like, I'm still going to keep going about my business the way I intended to go about my business. I couldn't allow the disturbances to go far enough away or subside enough to where I could really be in that space. And I didn't want what I was going through to permeate through the group. It was clear. I could tell, it was obvious that I was, not in a good emotional state at that time. And I tried, and I had to just go on my own and handle it and process it, and not out of compassion for you all. I didn't want to destroy the kirtan. So I left.
But that's what I think is like you're so much higher in your progress than like with us, because we could see on the outside you trying so hard to work on it, to be there for your people, for yourself. Like, we wouldn't have done all of those things. So that's like a higher part in your journey. We would have just bailed, or we would have never even come to kirtan in that state. But you like were doing all of this stuff. And I think like that takes you to a different space of the awareness and the efforts that you're putting versus just bailing the instant you feel that.
Thank you for those generous, kind words. And also remember that I once too was a person who would have just bailed and not shown up and, said I was going to go and then made a reason of why I wasn't going to go. So I've been there as well. And it just takes time and practice and application. And, we're all here studying. And so we're all well on our way. But thank you for that share of the story.
Nice, very nice. Very nice. So the conclusion to this is that the humanness is there, but the heart's intention is the key here. And externally, you may seem human in your expressions because the body is still going to react, but the heart's intention is different. Means, I don't know, Radha Swami's in Mumbai, and Godzilla attacks Mumbai and he flees. You wouldn't think, oh, he lost his status as a Muni. He should have just gone on his japa walk, even though the city's being destroyed by a monster. You're gonna live as a human, right? Welcome to my brain. You're gonna live as a human, and you're gonna have experiences as a human, but the heart intention is where things are different. Very different.
So
Thank you.
tickled that
Can
you
I
used
just
Godzilla.
add that to I notice sometimes when we want to like make this real give an example of of like being attached, it seems like it's always something that has to be like really negative, but just to also clarify for those who listen after us too, it could be the opposite of Godzilla destroying a space, a country, a city or something like that would be like winning the lottery, or like just just getting awarded I don't know, some massive amount of money to create space station to go live in outer space and be able to travel back and forth. So I'm just trying to create like a polar opposite but more happy, exaggerated thing that and now just like to point out a little part in the purport too at the end that says that in either scenario the person, the Muni, is unattached or unaffected in the sense that they don't change and become more attached to the senses. And so at the in the back, the last paragraph of the purport, it says I'll read a little bit. It says but it's talking about a stita dear Muni. But just as an example, he says, he is called a Muni fixed in mind. Such a fully Krishna conscious person is not at all disturbed by the onslaughts of the threefold miseries, for he accepts all miseries as the mercy of the Lord, thinking himself only worthy of more trouble due to his past misdeeds. And he sees that his miseries by the grace of the Lord are minimized to the lowest. Similarly, when he is happy, he gives credit to the Lord, thinking himself unworthy of the happiness. He realizes that it is only due to the Lord's grace that he is in such a comfortable condition and able to render better service. And for the service of the Lord, he is always daring and active and is not influenced by attachment or aversion. And then he gives a very simple definition. Attachment means accepting things for one's own sense gratification, and detachment is the absence of such sensual attachment, but one fixed in Krishna consciousness has neither attachment nor detachment because life is dedicated to the service of the Lord. So I think that that's also like a defining quality too, right? Like we may not be attached, or we may not be so affected, and we're still working through and living through our lives, but we still have sort of that I'm doing this for my family, for my friends, for my community. I'm doing this for me element to living, versus this person from this perspective may have that I'm doing this in service to the Lord perspective. That's a very very nuanced but high quality of being.
Nice. Any other thoughts on this? Or should we move on? Okay, let's keep going. I think you got another one, Asriel.
In the material world, one who is unaffected by whatever good or evil he may obtain, neither praising it nor despising it, is firmly fixed in perfect knowledge.
Nice.
Hmm.
So this word pratista, sta means situated. Pra means forward or forward in being situated. Jnana, so situated in knowledge. Nice. All right. Who's next? Max?
Yeah.
258.
One who is, I'll read off the screen.
Sure.
One who is able to withdraw his senses from sense objects as the tortoise draws its limbs within the shell. It's firmly fixed.
Perfect consciousness. You kind of trailed off there. One is able to withdraw the senses from the sense objects. Any thoughts? And then the next one.
Though the embodied soul may be restricted from sense enjoyment, the taste for sense objects remains. But ceasing such engagements by experiencing a higher taste, he is fixed in consciousness.
So this is like a starred verse. If you take a Bhakti Shastri, which is kind of like a little degree in Krishna consciousness, you have to memorize this verse. Vishaya vinavartante nira harasya dehina. There's a couple of things here to look at. Dehina, in the very beginning, Krishna calls the soul deha, which means embodied. Right? You remember the verse that we use at Max? What's the verse?
Dehinosmin yata dehe.
That's right. Which means embodied. So Krishna is referred to, Krishna refers to the soul as deha, but in nowhere, in no place, in no literature is Krishna ever referred to as deha. Krishna is not embodied. And so this is an interesting word to use because it's the embodied soul who may be restricted from sense enjoyment. And the taste for sense objects remains. So what would be an example of somebody who is restricted from sense enjoyment, but they haven't given up the taste for that sense object?
First, the first thought that came to mind was like a blind person, or a person who can't speak or talk or something like that. But then I was thinking about, a monk or someone who has stepped, has taken sannyas or renounced the world, bishop or other people in that high level of church and secular religious life.
Exactly. Perfect. Like we know the plague we've had in this country about people who have taken up a priestly caste, but the taste for sexual desire still remains. And they engage in all sorts of nonsense and abuse, even though they had an original good intention. Like our friend Max here, it took up the robes of a Buddhist monk, which tens of thousands of people do yearly, and barely any of them, small percentage, keeps them on. Right? It's just because the taste for sense objects still remains. Or like because we think, oh, I want to be freed from sense gratification. So I'm going to sit like this. I'm going to close my eyes, I'm going to plug my ears. I'm going to nothing. I'm just going to shut it off. But it doesn't work. Otherwise, prisoners would be yogis, right? They're locked up. They don't get to see anything. They don't get to do anything. It doesn't
And
work.
if you think about it, humans could literally save so much money if they didn't go into sense gratification. So much of our finances are dumped into sense gratifications of all sorts.
Yeah.
Yeah, you know, it's very much obvious in the world and circle of addicts. You know, just because they give something up and they stop partaking in whatever substance it was, it doesn't mean that the desire and the senses aren't pulling in that direction. And Ed and I were just talking about this the other day of the difference between consciously choosing to control your energy and taking a vow of celibacy because it feels like it's right for you, but that fine line between that and repressing something because you think it's what you're supposed to do and it's what you're told to do. And so then you repress, and then you're in this environment and you don't really get, you know, it's a repression rather than a mastery. Repressing is not how you master things. You know, you have to face those things and work with them, but repressing them and pretending like the desires aren't there in order to be in control is a total spiritual bypass. And so it comes out sideways at some point when we do that.
Yeah. Nice. Very nice. And so, and then let's look at this one line here. Really, really important line. Padam means something higher. Dristva means to experience. And so by experiencing something higher, nivartante, you give up those things that are lower. By experiencing something higher, you give up those things that are lower. You become detached from them. So in this case, the Krishna is referring to that if you try to restrain your senses, you won't be able to. But if you engage in a higher activity, those lower desires will go away because of our attachment and our now engagement in a higher space. So what's y'all's thoughts on that?
We thought we were engaging in a higher space of eating by giving up refined sugar and going with natural sugars. And we thought, okay, like the refined sugar is like lower, so we're going to do better and only get natural things, right? But then literally as you all are talking, this thing happened inside of us where it's like, now we're just obsessed with all the freaking natural sugar things and all of the sugar-free chocolates and the freaking fruit snacks and all this. Like we have a whole cabinet of the whole natural sugars. So we thought that we were going to a higher place and, oh, this is so much better, but we're still going into sense gratification because we're loading up instead of with refined sugar, just the natural sugars, and that's no better. So this lesson is like showing us, oh my gosh, you're not doing what you think you're doing. You're still giving into it.
I have that
True,
same
and
experience with protein
give
cookies.
yourself. Go ahead, Ed. Sorry.
I said I have that same experience with protein cookies.
Oh my God.
but these are important baby steps towards progress. Is we do get a slightly higher taste. So natural sugars are better for you than refined sugars. Is there still a desire in your senses? Yes, but you are refining the quality that you feed that desire with, and that is the path. Is you get a little bit of a higher taste, and then eventually you get a little bit of a higher taste, and you need less and less of those things because you found other things that are better and more wholesome and holistic for you. So
Yeah.
And I think a subtlety in this concept of, you know, taste is that there is a little bit of an addictive principle in there that's like a really fine graded line. Like you can easily like fall over into it and not know that that it's there, you know.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
But it's good when you're able to apply it to, you know, chanting kirtan or japa, and you're like really addicted to that versus, you know, the stuff that we put into our mouth.
Well, I think a good example is like relationships. You know, when you're single, it sounds nice to be out and about and meeting this person and sleeping all over town and this and that. Then you meet one person and you want to make a connection and you want that higher taste of a single relationship with one person. And so you give up all of that, even if you're tempted by it, you give it up to have a loyalty and a sweet relationship with one person. So you have a higher taste, you've given up something lower, right? So in Krishna consciousness, it's the same thing. There's all sorts of things that you can be distracted by. Go to TV, go to this thing, listen to that, blah, 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 all over the place. Your senses are everywhere. But I find, the more I focus my attention on just one thing, means anytime I read Bhagavatam. Anytime I have some free time, I listen to a kirtan. Anytime I've got something to do, I'll look up something Krishna conscious. And now that I'm focusing, I'm not missing listening to all my Spotify playlists or what going through YouTube. I'm focused and I feel a higher taste. I'm more, my senses are more inspired by that limit to a spiritual thing as opposed to all over the place with materialism. That's me.
A question for you.
Yes.
That really sealed in, well, this is not the question, but that really sealed in, like, I feel like all of our shares, Dharma, us, Ed, about how like you're picking like how you seal it in, like how you stop going all over the place with things. It's like you literally just said, if I have free time, I do this. But how did you get to that point? Like, did it just click for you one day, or did you go through like a long time of trying to get to that, where you said these are the three things I'm going to do when I have free time, or when I this or that?
Yeah, I think that at least for me, in my practical experience, over time, I just simply get more satisfaction in putting in the time that I have in Krishna conscious spiritual activities, so that, you know, maybe like, for example, I had a whole TikTok thing going on, 14,000 followers, and putting up videos, this and that. But I was finding myself spending a lot of time surfing TikTok. And at some point I realized I have more personal satisfaction if I just read Bhagavatam, Gita, listen to a lecture. And so even though I had this whole experience, I ended up just cutting it because the spiritual activity gave me more overall joy than sitting and even though I'm doing these Bhagavad Gita videos, they're mixed with the flipping TikTok and watching people and this and that and the other thing. And so the more that, in my experience, I cut back and focus on just my spirituality, obviously I go to the gym, I do other things, but the more that I do that, the more overarching satisfaction I have. But I'm still attached to so many things, this and that. But the more it goes on, the more I'm peaceful and the less I'm like agitated by so many little nonsense things that go on in this world. Krishna eventually says here, when you have passed out of the deep, dark forest of ignorance, you become detached from what is heard and what is to be heard. Means gossip, talking, news, this, that. You become like, What's y'all's thoughts?
What is heard versus what is to be heard? Like your entire thing was gorgeous, but then that was gorgeous. So it just, wow.
That's Krishna. He said that. I'm the parrot.
Did you want to say something? You look like you were leaning in.
You know, I was just thinking about like the, you know, right, it's part intention, it's part of the self-discipline. I was to be able to like really have all the, so in our world, right, multitasking and diversity is something that is so big, and like it's a big value. You know, people want to see the world and want to do all these different things and try all these different things, and so it really takes a and it's not to say that you can't experience that in what we're talking about, but there's a part of that taste and desire comes in when you're like, you're okay with saying, you know what, if today was my last day and this was the only thing that I got to do was read the Bhagavatam, chant japa, or do kirtan, or do something Krishna conscious, you know, then I would be okay with that. Versus if you told that to, you know, if you survey a group of people that question, people would be like, I want to travel the world, I'm going to do this, I'm going to blow that up, I'm going to do this with so many people, I'm going to do that, I'm going to whatever, right? But if like when we have sort of shifted our value system to be like, you know, I'm okay with not doing all of that to just be able to do this because, you know, I get a deeper satisfaction from it, or it's a deeper sense gratification too at the same time, but one that doesn't obviously incur the same karmic reaction as if you were to, you know, explore your wildest dreams in the world.
Yeah, in my work, my boss's boss came to us and said, I want you all to put down where your career goals are and where do you want to see yourself in a couple of years? And we have to do this, the whole bullshit thing. And my boss is a friend of mine that I've actually known for a long time outside of this company. She hired me because she likes me and we work together. And she said, what are you going to write? And I said, I don't know. I don't have any goals. Like, I'm fine. What am I supposed to write? And I thought a lot about it, and it's not that I'm such a Krishna conscious person and blah 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 blah. It's that the content of Krishna consciousness is so sweet and nice that even a person like me can find attraction and satisfaction from it. It's not that I'm special. It's special to the degree that someone like me can be like, oh yeah, how about I just read Bhagavatam? That's nice. So that's the beauty of this, of spirituality, is that it's not about you. It's the beauty of it. And so that's this verse that's saying, Padam, the higher thing, can make it so that the lower things are just not attractive anymore. It's kind of like, even like, it's like a transcendental version of the 12-step program. You first accept the higher authority, and now you become, you know, the higher authority captures you, and these lower things. Which else thought? I didn't want.
I think it's just part of like a maturation. Like, you know, we physically have to mature through life. And so like our taste buds and, you know, that changes over time. And the music that we like when we're 10 is different than when we're 15 and when we're 25, and or even our style, like it all goes through a maturation process. And that's necessary. And so we go through a maturation process. So we might see little steps that we want to acknowledge, but we do want to be aware that we aren't fooling ourselves into thinking that we're making a change when we're not. We're just replacing the crutch, right? But sometimes replacing the crutch with a good crutch gets us away from the crutches altogether, right? Like I got a Gaia TV account because I was watching a lot of Netflix, and I thought, well, if I'm going to spend my time and my money watching these things, I might as well watch Gaia TV, which is all, it's like spiritual Netflix. It's just all spiritual stuff. You know, so I'm still spending time on the screen watching stuff, but at least now it's a little more refined what I'm doing. And then eventually it's like, man, I don't want to spend all my time doing that. Let me do something else, you know, and taking those little steps is important. And you know, we have phases in our lives where we are very goal oriented when you're in your 20s and you're in your 30s and you are trying to create a life for yourself, and that can be helpful and suitable at that time. But then eventually we move beyond that phase and we don't have to be so attached to those things, or our taste for life changes where we're like, I don't want to work 150 miles an hour every day.
Yeah.
It's not the taste that I have for life. I'm not so attached to the things that require me to work so hard. So it's like our spiritual taste buds for the human experience mature over time, and it begins to refine. And what we didn't find palatable when we were younger is not only palatable now, but actually what we really enjoy, where the real nectar is. You know, team, eventually, you know, you'll get all your sweetness just from like Krishna Lila, and you won't need to eat sweets. You'll just get sweets in your ears, and that'll be good enough for you.
Oh man, we hope so.
But you know, give yourself time. It's okay. Even the Moonies love to have a little laddu every now and then.
Okay, let's keep going. Unless there's something else. Ed, you're up. Around 260.
We're at 60 or 59?
260.
All right. The senses are so strong and impetuous, O Arjuna, that they forcibly carry away the mind, even of a man of discrimination who is endeavoring to control them.
This reminds me of that talk that Vaisheshika gave about the sleeper wave.
Yeah.
The what?
The sleeper wave. Like, even for somebody who is controlled and fixed in their meditation, he used the analogy of this spot in Northern California where people like to go out on the edge of this cliff and like take photos because the ocean is right there and it's really nice. But every now and then, these what they call sleeper waves, like the current looks fine, but every now and then a big wave will sneak in and it'll just wash up and literally wash those people out. Like, people have died out there taking pictures. And they're called sleeper waves, where like the current looks fine, everything looks good, but all of a sudden this massive wave rolls in out of nowhere. And so I think that that's a good analogy for us to understand that sometimes these sleeper waves, they hit us over the head and they wash us out. And it happens to all of us. And we to have the awareness of like, oh, I got hit by a sleeper wave. I'm like, I got sucked way out. I got to swim my way back to the shore.
Yeah.
That's what this verse reminds me of. Like, you know, the senses are strong and impetuous, like, and we can't escape them. And so it's inevitable that something's going to happen. And so, again, I think he's going to bring in, and he mentions this before, like that was the talk that, the point that Vaisheshika was making was that's just for a person who's just disciplined and they're just discerning and they're endeavoring to control themselves, but there isn't devotion. There isn't that heartfelt aspect of faith. It's just like, I'm going to do these techniques and I'm going to master myself and it's just going to happen. And if I just sit and meditate, it's going to be fine. But sleeper waves come into our lives and things hit us over the head and we fall off of the pedestal we've put ourselves on. And but for one with devotion, that process is different. We are fixed in the devotion, and so we don't get swept out as easily in these big sleeper waves.
Yeah.
61.
Yep.
All right. One who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and fixes his consciousness upon me, is known as a man of steady intelligence.
Mhm.
You
So
know,
go ahead.
I was just going to say that those first two sentences made me kind of, jumped out to me as like, first, to try to fully control the senses is one thing, but then to control the senses and then fix the mind and consciousness and Krishna consciousness is sort of another thing, because um, the mind can tend to be all over the place, not just in sense gratification, but just in wandering and pondering and remembering and planning. And, I guess that's, if we look at the mind as a sense, it's gratifying the mind. But the way that I'm looking at it is that the mind is like a river or the ocean, right? When you look at it, you see it, it's constantly flowing. You can't just stop one current with a rock or with anything. It's constantly flowing. So to control the senses is one thing, but to then fix the mind so that it can only be in Krishna consciousness is like another feat or endeavor in itself. So that's just what I want to mention about that.
Before I call on TS, I just wanted to mention one thing to recognize as we're going through the Bhagavad Gita is Krishna is here referring to like a jnani yogi who's engaged in spiritual activities, but at the same time is trying to control their senses, develop knowledge, and practice like a yoga, like a meditation. And you see, as we move forward, Krishna will start to speak about the devotee, the bhakta, and in those conversations, Krishna doesn't refer to them trying to control their mind or senses or sit in meditation and this and that, because they're just totally absorbed in Krishna. And later in the Bhagavatam, if you read it, there's a lot of yogis and munis, but at the end, the devotees, they seem externally just like everybody else, but they're fully engaged in Krishna's service, though they may be young girls or this, that, and the other thing. So TS, what were you going to say?
These verses, especially the last one who restrains his senses, keeping them under full control, and then like being restricted from sense enjoyment, and like the tortoise going into its shell, like taking its limbs into the shell. It keeps like bringing up for us, like it's like certain people with cognitive disabilities and impairments that affect their behavior based upon their impairment, they would not be able to reach this level of any of these verses. And I was like trying to figure out, like, how does somebody who has behavior management struggles, how do you, like, you're less than because you can't get to these levels of restraining your senses and keeping it under full control.
Sure.
Well, I real quick, I just want to challenge that statement of who says you're less than? And you don't have to answer it. Just think about that. Like, we put that sort of construct on that person, like they're less than because they can't take the spiritual journey, but every part of the human journey is the spiritual journey.
Yeah.
So even though they may not be able to practice or come across this knowledge, there's still grace and there's still mercy and benevolence of the divine on that being as they're making their journey. They're not lost. Like, they're not a lost cause, even though it may appear to us in this lifetime and with the evidence in front of us that it is a lost cause. It isn't a lost cause. Even Lord Shiva, he is the deity over the lost souls, so that even those who are lost in that darkness can still make their way to realization and consciousness. but Jagai, you were going to say something.
Yeah, no, that's very true. That's very true, very, very true. And to add to what Dharma says, soon Arjuna keeps kind of meditating on this. Yeah, but yeah, still sitting like this kind of a yogi guy who's fully fixed and detached and this and that. He says, what you're saying, I can't do it. It just seems very impractical to me. Like I'm a big old warrior and I've got family, he's got boys and he's got a wife, and like, how in the world am I supposed to be like this? Even engaging in the Krishna consciousness, but with this whole like trying to control the mind and the senses and blah, blah, blah. Krishna eventually starts to tell Arjuna, the more you practice Krishna consciousness, the more your senses are engaged, the more you are just complete in yourself, whoever you are and whatever you're doing, because your heart is in the right place. And if you look at the supreme goal picture at the end, these are cows and cowherd boys and young girls and gopis and this and that. And they live in a rural village and they play with Krishna and they think about Krishna. There's no thought of fully controlling the senses. It's just everything is Krishna, all of it. And so this is a progression, like we were talking about the other day, of a type of yogi. And as they progress, they slowly shed this attachment to being like a yogi type with the senses controlled, with knowledge and the whole thing. They soon shed those things and become more and more and more and more engaged in Krishna consciousness, to the point where the highest yogis are girls who spend their day milking cows and chit-chatting amongst themselves and doing household affairs, but their hearts and their mind and their conversation and everything is fully engaged in Krishna. And these yogi types are aspiring to be like them. Any thoughts on that? It was I just threw everybody in the deep end. Israel had to leave.
Good. It is hard to reconcile our people in the community who are neurologically diverse and neurologically challenged, because it feels like there isn't any hope for them, and that they don't have the intelligence, the real mental cognition to do things. But I think for me, it's always just been important to remember that they're not a lost cause, and they aren't. It just the pathway doesn't look as clear to us, but that there are moments of mercy and grace and benevolence and opportunities and fate, and there's so many opportunities that I believe that the divine is always offering us an opportunity to take a different path, whether we are cognitively aware of it or not. And so no one's ever a complete loss. No soul is ever a lost cause ever. There's always a way. Krishna, when I learned that about Shiva, it just really comforted me to know that, like, that's partly why, he hangs out in the graveyards and all the dark places. Like he's willing to be in that kind of environment. He's not too good and too pure to not hang around the lost souls and the ghosts, the ghouls and the goblins, but that he is there to be a light even in the darkest of places.
I think the lost cause, like right as you were speaking, I think where the lost cause comes in is well, first of all, yes, we are tapping into what you're saying, like there is no lost causes, but then there was this duality of like, okay, the lost cause becomes when the person who has any cognitive deficit, so let's say an anxiety disorder, where they're having 5 or 6 panic attacks a day, and they're reading the Bhagavad Gita, or let's go with New Thought. New Thought is saying, just, if you're positive and if you just think good thoughts and you attract it, then you're going to change your experience. You get rid of your disease. you get money, you get all these things. If you manifest it, if you put all this in. And then now the duality is you have the Bhagavad Gita that's saying, you know, this restraining your senses and being free from these things. And if the person attaches to that, that's where the lost cause becomes, because then they start like obsessing on these verses of like restraining my senses, or like in the New Thought, you know, I'm not being positive enough. I can't get rid of my depression because I'm not positive enough. And like we are speaking partially from our own experience, because it's like you get so hooked on the verses and what the teachings tell you, and then you become a lost cause because you then beat yourself up because you can't get to that level, because your brain keeps misfiring with the anxiety attacks or whatnot. Or maybe you have, you know, severe complex trauma, and you don't feel safe anywhere you go, so you stay inside your house. It's like, then the lost cause is like, I'm not doing this right. Like, and then you spend your entire life trying to, for example, get to verse 61. You only just want to be at 61, but you never can get there. And then like you end up harming yourself or something because you think that you're less than, because that lostness somehow like gets you, and you think you just can't do it, you know. So there has to be like a way for any of these teachings, whether it's New Thought or the Bhagavad Gita, to not have people in that community be beating themselves up about their mental condition, because it happens like time and time again, and I still haven't figured out how to stop that from happening.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear on this one. And I think it's important to remember that Krishna offers many pathways. This is just one, and these are so ideal, and we desire so much to have them that that's just kind of what we get hooked into. Like, yeah, I want to be in control of myself, and, you know, like be fixed in my consciousness. I mean, I don't have an anxiety disorder, at least not officially diagnosed. But I beat myself up. I read these verses, even today, some of the ones we've gone over, I'm like, it sounds so great, but I am not going to accomplish that this lifetime. Like, just being real, there's no way I'm going to fully achieve that. It doesn't mean I'm not going to work towards it, and I'm not going to have compassion towards myself. But we have to remember that there are many ways. And so I have tried to let go of this idea of duality when it comes to traditions and different pathways, rather than thinking of them as duality, like, well, this one says to do this thing, because that is kind of the positive thinking, and the law of attraction can seem in contrast to the Gita, but I think that really in essence they are the same, really down into their essence. And so for anybody who is facing any kind of challenge, whether it's a learning, you know, challenge, or neurologically diverse, or just having diagnoses that really hinder them from functioning on a cognitive level 100% all the time, really it's at its essence is where the growth comes from. And so we can impact each other's lives by touching each other's hearts. And when we have the essence of Krishna consciousness, or we have the essence of law of attraction, and we understand that really the essence is to emanate the love that we are, that those are really powerful seeds that we plant, and those do impact people, even if we don't see the evidence of that right in front of us. And so it's not an easy answer. Like, how do we hold space for neurologically diverse individuals? And like at the Bluff is a great example. We get a lot of people out there who are mentally unstable and need some support with their mental health. And I actually honestly believe that even though those interactions can be really jarring to us as teachers and students, that it isn't by accident that that particular individual ended up having their incident at the Bluff, surrounded by people who could have compassion and hold space for their breakdown or whatever they're having. And that does have lasting impacts, even though that person may not be conscious of it at the moment, or even ever this lifetime. But I do think that those things are impactful on a karmic level that we don't always see. Max, you want to chime in here?
Yeah, I want to say that I think our need to categorize and differentiate is part of our attachment to the way we think as humans and our very human experience, that a relationship with Krishna would be, nowhere does Krishna teach us that we need to, there needs to be a level to, you graduate to this awareness, and then you graduate to this awareness, and then you graduate to this awareness. And he says, or you can just think of me, and then you'll be all good. And we as humans, when things are ambiguous, we compare ourselves to each other, and we put things in categories so that we can understand them. And that's just what we do. People who are diversely or different than us, and we don't understand them, they can be mistreated socially or by society or by things that are misunderstood. It's not about they can't graduate to this level of consciousness or that level of consciousness or that level of consciousness, because to Krishna, you're just an embodied soul. And that's the crux. So.
Good. You were saying basically what I was going to say. And I never read anywhere where Krishna says, you have to finish verse 61 in the Bhagavad Gita or you're screwed. I've never read anywhere that even it says that you have to read the Bhagavad Gita. So does it mean that no person has attained love for God unless they've read 18 chapters of the Bhagavad Gita? Krishna here says, those who are constantly devoted, serving me with love. Doesn't say anything about anything but serving Krishna with love, appreciating God in the space that you're in, understanding God for how God has appeared to you. In that way, Krishna, God, whatever, gives you an understanding by which you can come to him. Doesn't say exclusively Bhagavad Gita past chapter 2, text 61. Your relationship with Krishna is your own. If you've never heard of Gita, you've never heard of Hare Krishna, you've never heard of any of this stuff, Krishna's still in your heart, and you still have as much of an opportunity as anybody to make a relationship 100%. For me, my path has been presented before me, that Krishna has provided this, and this is what I'm doing to make my relationship with Krishna. That means, what about Saint Francis? Saint Francis didn't have a relationship with Krishna. He probably had no idea who Krishna was or even heard of the Bhagavad Gita. But his love for God was amazing. So I appreciate what you're saying, TS. Your plight is common amongst all people of all capacities. It's all a struggle. And Hare Krishna.
We noticed a change in ourselves when we were reading those verses. So we noticed a deeper understanding and connection to Krishna, because for the first time in reading those, we were not doing what we were talking about, of like, oh my gosh, we're not at verse 61, we can't do that, we're bad, like blah blah blah. It was just like, oh, like taking in the information without judgment or without shame, just really just listening to it and having the understanding that just because we're not there, that doesn't mean anything about us. Even though we provided that example, it was a different experience. Whereas before, when we first started studying this with you all, every verse was like a judgment for us, like, oh my gosh, we're not doing that, we're not doing this, and then we would be very heavy about it after class ended.
Well, one thing to note, which I've heard from many people, is that it's really difficult to know what things are buried in our consciousness that comes up when we start to peel away the layers of material life. I knew a guru sannyasi who was a guru sannyasi for 40 years, and well, a good one too. And he was saying that as he's been progressing in his spiritual life, issues that he had with his mother from his childhood were now plaguing him. And he was embarrassed by it. He thought, I should be over this kind of stuff, but I'm not. So we have trouble, we have problems, we have shit we got to go through. You, me, Ed, everybody. What does this bring out? That's part of the mystery of it all. But we're fortunate that it brings it out so that we can deal with it, get over it, move forward with our troubles, and become better in our own hearts and our life. Any closing thoughts? What do you think, Ed?
I was gonna say, like, I connect with that in terms of like what this, what we're talking about now, and just to use the term in terms of everyone's individual uniqueness, state of mind, state of being, right, without necessarily putting the labels on it. And it's like every one of us in our journey and our experience is a unique opportunity to show the effect, the powerful effect of whatever spiritual path we take, right? Whether it's Krishna consciousness, the Maha Mantra, or if it's down any path, right? When we practice that faith through everything that we are experiencing in our embodied state, every agitation, every stability, instability, imbalance, whatever we want to call it, everything that we practice, when we diligently practice it through that, and it's, the ultimate result is on the other side of life, but we get the little glimpses and experiences as we're living to prove to ourselves, to as evidence to the world that all of this eventually works. And it serves the ultimate purpose of self-realization, whether that is, whether it's, one person with that feels like they have an individual self, or a multi-embodied self with multi-selves in it. At the end of it, once we've gone through the experience and we look back and we reflect, or we come out on the other side, we're like, oh man, okay, that worked.
Nice.
But we just got to do the living. That's the frustrating part for me.
Yeah. Nice. Well, it's 3:05. Anything else? Any closing thoughts? Otherwise, we could do our closing prayer and meet up meet up on Sunday for those who are coming. Anything else? Okay. Vancha kalpa tarubhyascha kirpa sindubhya evacha patitanam pavanebhyo vaishnavebhyo namo namaha. Sadhu Sangha ki jai. Granthara Srimad Bhagavad Gita ki jai. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Gaura Premanande Hari Hari Bol. Okay, Prabhus. See you on Sunday for those who are showing up. Otherwise, have a great week, and I'll see you all next Thursday.